All right, welcome to session four, part one, Parent as Authority. All of session four is going to be on parent as authority. It's a big topic. It's a topic that I get quite a few questions about from parents that come and see me in my private practice. So I'm going to break it into two parts, part one and two. So let's start with part one of parent as authority. First of all, I've listed four characteristics of effective discipline here from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 6 through 14. So, first of all, discipline is a necessary component of love. And a lot of people seem to think that if I'm not disciplining my son or daughter, then I'm loving them more. I'm letting them off the hook. I'm letting them go. But really, that's not the case. Really, the Bible says that God disciplines those whom he loves. And in fact, in Proverbs 13:24, the Bible says that fathers who love their sons are careful to discipline them. So I believe that discipline is a component of love. So if you love your children, then you will discipline them. The second point about discipline is that it does seem painful at the time, but the result is progress toward righteousness. And that comes from verse 11 of Hebrews 12. And it can be painful for the child because they're losing a privilege, or they're experiencing pain at not being able to do something that they want to do. Something's been taken away from them. It can also be painful for the parent because the parent feels pain when they see their child in pain. And so sometimes it's very difficult for the parent to follow through consistently on discipline because of the kind of natural human tendency to want to avoid pain. So one thing that you might want to think about and tell people that you work with is that pain does not equal harm. So just because your child is experiencing pain, it doesn't mean you're harming them. You might actually be even helping them. So it's normal for you to discipline your child and for that discipline to then result in pain. The third is that discipline takes courage because it's painful and it's not easy to do. And your child may cry or put you on a guilt trip or something like that. It takes courage. And so you have to have the courage to do what is right for your child and rather than maybe what feels right for your child at the time. And so it definitely is a misconception that parents intuitively know what to do with their kids and they just need to follow their gut, because sometimes what their gut's going to tell them is to not discipline their kid, when in actuality that's exactly what they need in order to feel loved. And then the fourth characteristic of effective discipline, the fourth characteristic of discipline is that discipline leads to peace and holiness of life. And this is something you want to remind yourself of, is that in a household where there is discipline, there will be peace. And all parents would agree that they would love to have more peace in their home and in their household. So there is a positive result of loving your child by disciplining them, and that is that your children will be more compliant. Your children will be more honoring to one another. They'll be kinder. They will not talk back as much. They will not argue as much. They will not raise their voice as much. And so when they're not doing these things, you're going to have more peace in your home. Okay, so let's look at four characteristics of effective discipline. The first thing you need to do is you need to have very clear rules and routines. And when you come up with your rules and your routines, you want to be as specific as possible, and you want to be as behaviorally specific as possible. For instance, it's not a good rule to say, be nice to your sister. A better rule would be, never hit your sister, never antagonize your sister, never argue, so that you get a little bit more behaviorally specific. um, so that you limit the possibility of them arguing back with you. Uh, and then you need to modify as necessary. And modification is necessary because you may discover a behavior that is inappropriate, and yet you don't have a rule about that behavior. And so then you're going to need to add a rule to cover that particular behavior. You're also going to need to modify because some rules will be very pertinent at one stage of the lifespan for the child and not so much at another. So when they're younger, they may have a rule like take a shower every night. But when they become an adolescent, that may not be an issue. They may just habitually take showers every night, and so you can take away that particular rule. Um, they may have a rule about never hit your sister, but when they're an adolescent, that doesn't even become an issue, so you can take that away. Now, there are other rules that you may have to add in when they become an adolescent, like be home by curfew. So when they're kids, they're not even going out, but as an adolescent, they may push the boundaries of whatever curfew time you set, and so you have to have a clear rule that says, be home by 11 p.m. You don't want to say something like, be home at a reasonable time, because then you'll argue about what does reasonable mean. So you need to have a very clearly measurable behavioral statement of what the rule is. And then routines are also important for building safety, predictability with children. And so it's very nice to have, like, for instance, a morning routine where the child wakes up at the same time every morning, and then they go through the same routine in the same order. So you wake up in the morning, go to the bathroom, brush your teeth, get dressed, have breakfast, get your backpack ready for school, whatever the things are that need to be done in the morning, you kind of line them up on a schedule. And sometimes you can even post that schedule on in their bathroom on the medicine cabinet mirror or something like that, so that the child can actually just look at their schedule and kind of mentally check off in their mind, have I done everything on my routine? And that way parents aren't nagging their children. Did you brush your teeth? Did you get breakfast? Did you get dressed? Did you get your backpack ready? Because that can exasperate a child, and you don't want to do that. But you do want your child to get ready. And so if there's a routine that's written down that they can look at, and if the advantage of it being the same routine is that it then becomes a habit for them, and they begin to habitually do that particular routine. An evening routine could be very similar. Take a shower, clean your room, put your pajamas on, brush your teeth, pray, do a devotional, that sort of thing. And so you can build in an evening routine as well. But when kids have routines, it really does help them to feel soothed and calmed. That kind of fits in with the parent as comforter that we talked about. And it also helps them to feel safe, that they know what's going to happen. And it also makes your job easier because you're nagging less. Okay, so that's clear rules. When you have a rule, and you need the child to follow that particular rule, and they're not, then you need to make a specific request. And an example of a specific request would be, put your shoes in the shoe rack. So request is a command. You're actually commanding them to do it. You're not going to say to them, would you like to put your shoes away right now? Or can you please put your shoes away? You would just say, put your shoes away in the shoe rack. And then it's very important to have a time element word like now or never or always. So you could say, always put your shoes away where they belong. Always put your backpack away where it belongs. Never hit your sister ever. Take out the trash now. Take out the recyclables now. clean out the dishwasher now. Do your homework now. And if you don't use that time element word, then they're going to dawdle a lot of the times, and then you'll have to ask again. And so what some parents fall into the trap of making the same request several times over. Do your homework. I will. And then 5 minutes later, you're not doing your homework. Do your homework. I said I will. I'm doing it right now. And then 5 minutes later, why aren't you doing your homework? Get off my back. Leave me alone. And then both people get angry and irritated. A better way to approach it would be just to say, drop everything that you're doing and come over here and sit down at the table and do your homework now. And so with that time element word and that command with that request, you're much more likely to get what we call first time compliance. That's where the child's doing what they need to do the very first time. And that's very helpful because it will prevent an escalation of emotion on the part of the child and the parent that could lead to a rupture in the sense of relational connection that they have. The third characteristic of effective discipline is effective follow-through. So you need to follow through on whatever the request is that you're making. Or if you impose a consequence, you need to follow through on imposing that particular consequence. So for instance, if you say to your child, you're not allowed to have your frozen yogurt until you finished your dinner, follow through would be to monitor them to make sure that they are indeed done with their dinner before they start eating their frozen yogurt. And so if you notice that they're not done with their dinner and then they go into the freezer to get the frozen yogurt and they start to eat it, then you need to follow through. And your follow through might be something like, hey, let me see that frozen yogurt. And then you take it and then you put it back in the freezer, and then you stand in front of the freezer between them and the freezer, and then you say, finish your dinner first before you have frozen yogurt. And then you kind of like a sentry, you kind of guard the freezer until they finish their dinner, so that you're actually making it true that they're not able to have the frozen yogurt until they finish their dinner. So if they are throwing a Nerf football at their brother at the head, then you're having a problem with that. You would make a specific request with a time element word, and you would say something like, never throw the football at anyone's head ever. And then the follow through would be that you would grab the Nerf football and then put it up high in a cupboard where the kids could not reach it. And now you followed through, because there's no way they can throw that football at their brother's head because they can't reach the football to get to it. And then they'll say, I want my football back. And you could say, well, in 24 hours, I will give you your football back. And with consequences, that's usually plenty of time. If your child needs to go take a shower and they're downstairs and the shower's upstairs, the request would be, Johnny, go upstairs now and take a shower. And you may actually have to walk over to the couch, or probably turn off the computer or the iPad or the TV or whatever it is that's distracting them. Turn it off, take it away, and then escort them up the stairs. And if they're very small, you might even have to carry them up the stairs to get into the shower. That's an example of effective follow-through. So I can recall an instance when I was at Disneyland with my son, and we were riding on the tram, and there was a grandmother with her son, and he was sticking his legs out, and the instructions that the tram driver gave were, keep your arms and legs inside the tram. And so the grandmother said to the grandson, if you stick your legs out again, we're going home. And that was not a very good request to make, because she wasn't going to follow through on that. And sure enough, he stuck his legs out again, and she didn't follow through on anything. So he's just learning that it's all words. There's no real follow through. Then he's going to be more likely to do that particular behavior. So you have to follow through on whatever the consequence is that you're going to impose if a rule is broken, and you have to follow through on whatever it is that is the command that you're asking your child to comply with. Now, follow through does take more work on the parent's part than not following through. So yes, it is more work to follow through than to not follow through. It does require more monitoring. It requires more physical exertion on your time. But in the long run, you'll have children that are more compliant, and so, like I said earlier, you'll have more peace in your home. Okay. The last characteristic of effective discipline is consistency. And so consistency is that you're consistent with what the rules are, the routines are consistent, the commands, the requests you make are consistently the same, and the follow-through is enforced consistently. It's not like you follow through sometimes and you don't follow through other times. There's always follow through, and that follow through is always done on a consistent basis. Also, there needs to be consistency between the mother and the father, or whoever the caregivers are. Sometimes children are raised in a home where grandfather or grandmother is doing a lot of the discipline. Whoever the primary caretakers are that are doing the discipline, they need to be on the same page, the same rules, same routines, and imposing the consequences in a consistent way. And one of the most common problems that you'll see is one parent will enforce, let's say there's a rule that you have to take a shower every night before you go to bed, and let's say dad enforces that rule. But let's say dad's out on a business trip and mom needs to enforce that rule because dad's not there. And if she says to the child, well, you can take a shower in the morning, or you don't seem to be that dirty, it's okay to not take a shower. Now you have inconsistency. And so when dad comes back from his trip, that child is going to be more likely to argue or to not want to take a shower, to fight back in a sense, and there's going to be less peace in your home. And so the thing about consistency is, just like it says, you really have to be consistent. If you break that consistency, then you're actually reinforcing the child to argue with you or be more non-compliant in the future when you try and impose that particular rule or get them to comply with a particular command that you're making. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. We're going to talk about a whole array of follow-through techniques that can be helpful in working with children. The first one is to reinforce the alternate positive behavior. So what you do with this follow-through technique is you think about what is the negative behavior that the child is engaging in, and what's the alternate positive behavior that I can then reinforce. So for instance, let's say your child is running through the grocery store. The alternate positive behavior would be to walk instead of run. So instead of yelling at your child, stop running, you would say, we're going to be going to the grocery store today, and I want you to walk with mommy or daddy and stay next to me the whole time rather than running. And so if they're walking through the grocery store with you and staying near you and complying, then you want to reinforce them. And the best way to reinforce a child is just through your praise. And we call that social reinforcement, where you compliment them and affirm them. So you just say, I really like the way that you're staying near me in the grocery store, and I like the way that you're walking. Another example would be, let's say if you're in a library and your child is speaking too loudly, instead of saying, you need to stop yelling in the library, instead, you could say, I want you to speak quietly and softly. And then if they are speaking quietly and softly, then you could compliment them on that. Thank you for speaking softly and quietly in the library. If they, let's say, for instance, go upstairs to put away some toys that they've been playing with, you can reinforce them. I saw that you went upstairs to put away your toys in the toy chest. Thank you for doing that. That was very thoughtful of you. So the negative behavior would be leaving their toys all over the floor. The alternate positive behavior is putting their toys away. You can relate this to adolescence as well. Eating dinner and the adolescent, one of the most irritating things for parents of an adolescent is that they're looking at their smartphone throughout the dinner rather than engaging in conversation. So rather than nagging them about looking at their smartphone, you might say, hey, tonight I noticed that you didn't have your phone with you and you talked with us, and that felt really good for me. I really enjoy talking to you at dinner and finding out what's going on in your life, and I'm really glad that that you did that tonight. It was pretty cool. So that's reinforcing the alternate positive behavior, and we know through the research that it's much easier to increase positive behavior than it is to decrease negative behavior. We'll just do two more, and then we'll stop part one. The second one, the next follow-through technique, that should actually be a B there, would be physically make them do it. What that means is that if your child won't get in the stroller, you pick them up and put them in the stroller. If they won't get in the bathtub, you pick them up and you put them in the bathtub. If they won't walk with you, you hold your hand and you kind of drag them with you wherever you need to go. If they won't sit in the seat, you pick them up and you sit them down in the seat. So that's an example of what we call physical follow-through, and it works really well with very young kids. Now with older kids, you're not actually going to get into a physical jostle with them, but you may just kind of hover. And if they're not doing their homework, you may just stand in their presence and watch them until they actually start doing their homework. So that's physical follow-through, even though you're not actually touching them. Certainly you don't want to get into physical altercation. And this can work, like let's say they won't clear the table or something like that, then you can actually hover over them until they start putting things on the table away. So that's physically following through. And then the last thing for this session would be timeout. And this is usually appropriate for kids about 3 to 8 years old. And you want 1 minute of timeout for every year old they are. So 3-year-olds, 3 minutes, 4-year-old, 4 minutes, 5-year-olds, 5 minutes, and then 5 minutes through 8 years old. After 8 years old, you probably don't want to do timeout anymore. I get asked if you can use timeout with 2-year-olds, and I think that's okay, and just make it 2 minutes. The key with timeout is that the child doesn't get any stimulation. That would be reinforcing. And so the timeout area needs to be in a quiet place where there's not a lot of stimulation. So their bedroom's not a good place. There's too much stimulation there. Also, they have to be safe. So the bathroom's not a good place because they can hit their head on too many things. An empty room, empty living room, a hallway, some out-of-the-way part of the house where you can kind of see them to know that they're safe, but they're away from any kind of stimulation. And as much as possible to have the same area designated as a timeout area is very helpful. It's very important not to talk to them when they're in timeout because just your attention through talking is reinforcing. The other thing is that timeout wouldn't start if they're yelling and screaming. It's not going to start until they're quiet. If they come out of the timeout area, then you'll just redirect them back into the timeout area, and then their timeout will start when they're back in the timeout area. A lot of parents say, well, I've tried timeout and it doesn't work. But usually what's happening is they're not executing the timeout effectively. And so typically if you can execute the timeout effectively, it can be effective. Now, it can help the child change their behavior. Now, there are some kids that are just strong-willed kids and spirited kids, and so they may go to timeout quite a bit. That doesn't mean it's not helping. Maybe they're disruptive 6 times instead of 12 because you're using timeout. So I strongly encourage it, especially for younger kids, because there's not a whole lot that you can remove from a young kid that has any salience or value to them. And so timeout typically for kids is good for behaviors like hitting, biting, throwing things, destroying property, name calling, things like that. So those are typical rules that you might want to think about having a timeout for. Okay, that's it for part 1, and we'll pick up next time on part 2.